To whom much is given, much is required. Part of that requirement is sharing. Culture is the heartbeat within our lives, and it's at the core of so many things. While we live in a time when we are starving for wisdom, I welcome you to your wisdom retreat at Culture Raises Us. Today's guest, none other than, I should say, Jaha Johnson, who is a highly recognized and accomplished music executive who's had executive roles at Hitco Records, Def Jam, to name a few. He's also managed some of our favorite artists like Mary J. Blige, Common, Usher, and many, many others. He's currently the founder and owner of November Yellow record label and manager of Ari Lennox. And he also happens to be one of my dearest brothers for life, and someone who's inspired me in so many, many areas of my life. And before we have him kind of walk through his journey, I want to start with our signature question. And when you hear culture, what does that mean to you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I said it's, good to be here with my brother, and I just want to say hats off to you on Culture Raises Us. I mean, you've been doing a phenomenal job, and I believe it's long overdue for you to use your voice and your platform and the way you're using it. But to get right into it, when I hear culture, I think about a couple of things. I think about where you're from, what you believe in, and those things kind of come together to help define and shape you and your influences. For me, being from Brooklyn, New York, my family's from Jamaica, growing in a heavy West Indian influenced borough of Brooklyn. I think all of the foundation of what I consider culture and influence comes from that backdrop. And I always like to say that in a, almost in kind of like a selfish way, New Yorkers, we have the beauty of being born into one of the best playgrounds in the world because there's so many cultures there. That your palette is just very, very, very broad, right? So
Literally had this conversation the other day.
So we have the benefit of starting off with, a paintbrush that, no offense to anybody else, that you just don't get in other cities or other countries.
1000% agree. And I think it's a great segue into a number of things. First, sharing a little bit more about yourself, as you've already alluded to a couple of elements. But then two, when you talk about culture, we forget sometimes that we grew up in some very distinct cultures that shaped who we are today. And the way you just spoke about New York, I literally was just having this conversation the other day with somebody, just talking about the exposure that we had, and the different components that helped, exactly what you said, shape us, but also shape our environment, shape the different cultures that it started to birth from it. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And again, it is a natural swing into share a little bit more about yourself outside of being from Brooklyn, New York, family from Jamaica, and all the elements that I know play a key role in you. Share a little bit more regarding who you are and kind of what you've done.
I think that my path, I wanted to do something creative, right? Like I feel, again, when you hear culture, you think about art, you think about how art influences our everyday world and our everyday walk, right? And I knew that I wanted a job. I knew I wanted a career that wasn't kind of wash, rinse, repeat, wear a suit, 9 to 5, clock in, your weekends off. I wanted something that inspired me and allowed me to inspire others. So, starting off early, growing up in the clubs and dancing and, between that and playing basketball, and then you have some skater friends, like the culture that I was raised in, I was able to see everything, right? We grew up in a time when going to the village, you got exposed to house music, right? Then, I'd come and play ball with you, and that's another side of New York, and then you had some friends who's into skateboarding, that was a whole other side, and all that kind of like at the time when hip hop is really becoming pop culture, right? Hip hop started before us, but I will have to say that, 80s is when it really started to like take a kind of like a foothold on the industry, right? When you think about that iconic moment of Run DMC and their influence on the Shell to Adidas, right? To me, that's like a pop culture shifting moment, right? That started from the culture of hip hop. That started from the culture of New York. You know, these are some guys from Queens who put on tracksuits and shell toes and made a song called My Adidas. Yeah, I mean, there isn't something you can't name a more iconic, impactful cultural moment than that, right? Again, that came out of New York. Um, you know, and when you think about where they came from, Russell Simmons, Eric Rubin, you've got like this rock looking white guy with long hair at NYU, and you got this black guy from Queens. Like, again, culture of like these worlds coming together to create, you know, this shifting music of hip hop. Having that as my backdrop growing up in New York, you know, it was like the world was my playground. When I got to Atlanta for college, you know, going to an HBCU, going to Clark Atlanta University, which was heavily influenced by Spike Lee, another, you know, very important role in culture in New York, and the movies he was making and how he kind of presented like the Black college experience. It inspired me. I wanted to go to HBCU purely because of watching Spike Lee movies. And, you know, coming to Atlanta at that time, I feel like different than New York, it was more of a family music community. Whereas in New York, obviously there was, you know, music and the business was happening, but in Atlanta, because of So Def, LaFace Records, Rowdy Records, which is Dallas Austin, Organized Noise, which is Rico Wade, you had these families of, you know, people that kind of went to school together, grew up together, that were making music, but because the community was so small, everybody kind of banded together. So it wasn't as separate as it was, let's say, in New York. So it allowed me at the time as a young kid in college to kind of get in and learn from all these different people, interning at LaFace Records for Shanti Das, and interning at Rowdy Records under Karen Veazey and Kim Lumpkin, and you know, being able to come to Jermaine Dupri's video shoots for So Def and Escape, and, you know, watching what Organized Noise and Rico was doing with Outkast and Goody Mob, and it, there weren't these barriers. It wasn't like, oh, you can't come over here. It was like, yo, come in. Everybody kind of just like
Family. You
it's a
said it.
pot of
Family.
gumbo,
Family was
right?
first.
So, you know, that I knew I wanted to be in entertainment. I knew I wanted to do something that helped impact and shape culture. But Atlanta, you know, as much as I give the foundation of my credit to New York, Atlanta kind of set me on my path. Atlanta is what made me believe, like, okay, I can do this. Let me take my taste and what I was raised on in New York, and then let me come down here to this city that embraced me and embraced Black people in a way that you had never seen before in any other city in the world. And, you know, gave me a shot. Atlanta gave me a shot, right? No, you know, I can't, you know, there's no better way to put it than that. And that kind of set me on my path. And, you know, I joined up with some brothers, Noontime, which, you know, you had Chris Hicks on here, one of the founding partners, and Henry Nooney Lee and Ryan Glover and Terry Ross, and them with my good brother, rest in peace, Shakir Stewart. We started this production company, Noontime, and we were just, you know, there were 3 guys from Oakland, 4 guys from DC, me from New York, and we just were figuring out. We were manager, producers, and we were just hustling. We were like, we wanted in, right? And different than everybody else in Atlanta, we didn't have Atlanta roots, right? We were all transplants, right? So, you know, Jermaine and Dallas and Rico, they were born and raised in the city, right? So they had that as an advantage. But what we had as an advantage of, while they embraced us, we also had a hustle in us because we weren't from there that forced us to kind of go out.
That's right.
Right. And that was like a pivotal moment for us and in music, right? Because at that time, New York was on fire with what Def Jam was doing, and Puff with Bad Boy, and Andre with Uptown, and the West Coast had Death Row, and Quincy Jones had Quest Records. And at that time, L.A. Reid had put up LaFace with Babyface in Atlanta as this beacon, right? Of, you can get your talent seen in this city. You don't have to go to LA or New York. And at the time when you have all this great young talent, for that beacon to be there, for that tower to be in the city of Atlanta, it meant a lot. And it meant a lot because I think something that doesn't get talked about enough is geographically where Atlanta is located. it actually made it a natural destination for a lot of people of color because it's kind of in the middle, right? So
Mm,
it's you are
that's
from
right.
New York, and if you're in Texas, it's New Orleans. If you're in Ohio, if you're in Chicago, LA's a little bit further, but it's still very central. So, and because, I always say that talent is a lot of talent comes from college, right? Because it's that age when like you're a young adult and you're becoming your own person. Well, Atlanta's got not only 4 HBCUs, but you only have Emory, you also have Georgia State, you also have Georgia Tech. So you
Georgia
have
Tech.
all these
Yeah.
colleges, you have 5, 6, 7 colleges in like one footprint, right? So just imagine
Mm,
how much information, how much talent is being shared, people from all over the world descending on one city, all being inspired and influenced by hip hop, right? And being inspired by R&B, being inspired by just like, fashion and film and TV all in one city. That's a lot of information. So I think Atlanta had kind of a cheat code because there was no other city. Still is no other city in this country that has that population of Black people, that many colleges, that many HBCUs in one footprint that
yeah.
anybody can get to. You can drive there, you can fly there. So it just made it a natural place. And then the cost of living, wasn't expensive as New York or LA. So if you were an artist trying to find your way, you can come to Atlanta and figure it out without having to pay, exorbitant rents in New York or LA. So it
Hmm.
just it just presented a lot of opportunity for specifically people of color because we didn't have that opportunity in New York or LA where you're competing with everybody else. New York is a finance town. LA is a film and TV town, right? So in Atlanta, you're not competing with those other industries the way you are in the other cities.
You've always exemplified this pursuit of excellence, and you've always been such a motivational example in your presence, to be honest, within music culture as we know it today. So, with all that being said, I look at all the artists you've worked with, I look at all the labels, and I look at all the companies you've worked with over the years. Was there a particular moment where you realized just how big and instrumental music culture was to overall culture? And I know you talked about, the Run DMC moment, but was there another moment that was significant for you that showed you just how big this music culture was and is?
It's interesting. And to your point, there've been a lot of moments when I've been reminded the impact of music, and particularly Black music, has on culture as a whole. And there's one moment that stands out. At the time when I was at Def Jam, as an A&R executive, my niche has always been R&B. So I was the R&B person there,
Hmm.
working on Cisco and Drew Hill and Kelly Price from 112. But again, I just had the best seat in the car because at this time, my peers, my fellow A&Rs are Herb Gotti and Skane and Jessica Rivera and JoJo Brim. And this is the time when Herb is, he brings in Murder Inc., he brings in Rockefeller, he brings in Rough Riders. And I remember when Jay-Z did Change Clothes. Now, I we all remember Jay-Z from Reasonable Doubt, especially if you're from New York. I remember being in college when he first came to Atlanta and, watching all those moments. But the moment that Change Clothes and that period, around the Blueprint album, when you saw like the hardest of hard guys, only wore white t-shirts and he said, no, we're all gonna wear button-down shirts.
Mm.
Or when Jay-Z would say, we're not drinking this, we're drinking that. We don't drive that, we drive this. And I was like, wow, his impact on culture, I've never seen anything like it. Right? You've seen other moments. I talked about the Run DMC moment. Mary's had our moments of impacting culture, and Puff and Snoop. I mean, I can name dozens of artists,
Countless,
right?
countless.
But you know, to to me, the person who kind of sums up impact, and listen, I have nothing to do with Jay-Z's career. Like I said, I've been a witness to some great moments, but just kind of witnessing that while also being a consumer. And I want to kind of stop in that for a second because I think it's important that when you do what we do, when you do anything in the creative space, I think it's important to always remain a fan, always remain a consumer, because then you never get high on your own supply, right? Like I never want to get to the point where I don't care about the music. I don't care about
Mm.
the show. I don't like I'm so desensitized because I've been to so many concerts or I've made so many songs that it doesn't I don't still get that feeling. Like no, that feeling is what we do it for, right? So that when I see an artist impact culture or change the way people dress or think, I still get that feeling because like that's what we do it for.
Mm.
It's so important that we remain grounded in the feeling that brought us here, right? If it's
Mm.
just transactional, if it's just a job, or if it's just business,
Forget it.
then you
Forget
lose
about it.
sight, and that's when culture leaves, right? And the foolishness enters because now you're not the touch points aren't real.
That's right.
You're not really talking about what's important. You're not even talking about, okay, what's this feel like? What's it gonna look like? And we're gonna make some mistakes. Some things we're gonna miss the mark on. But if we're talking about like, okay, well, why was Allen Iverson wearing cornrows? Why was that a cultural moment? Right? We have to talk about those things so that we can understand the impact that they have, right? Like if we don't talk about it, then it's like it didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
think, but to go back to your point, like, Jay-Z is definitely one of the biggest examples I've seen of a moment and a person that from an artist that really shifted and impacted culture, particularly with a lot of guys who came from the streets who didn't really have goals and aspirations of, living to 25 or doing
Hmm.
other than what they're doing. He gave hope to people who a lot of people thought were hopeless. And I think it's important to, recognize people that have that type of impact. And it wasn't just because he rapped. It was because of how he presented himself and how he spoke about his art, to his
Hmm.
fans.
Man, so the Jay-Z thing I get, I think you also mentioned something that's going to be very key and pivotal in terms of the responsibility of all. You were talking about us, but really, if you look at it, all who remain fans, who remain purists of the cultures in which we've helped create, we almost have an obligation and a responsibility to ensure that we stay in the conversations to alleviate that energy that you were talking about that comes in and appropriates because they do not live, breathe, cherish, build, develop this. What you just said there was so powerful, and I hope it's a tool that anyone who's listening who is of a culture understands you actually have a responsibility as you remain a fan, a purist, to inject yourself in to ensure that these things do not get watered down. And, because as you look at Black culture in general, as we know it, it's obviously borrowed,
Mm-hmm.
it's appropriated, it's been used to inspire a bunch of other industries and or cultures. So my question now is, so what's your thoughts of the importance of Black ownership and recognition of what it is that the Black community has brought to the
Oh
world?
man, listen, it is of the utmost importance, right? And
Mm.
listen, I'm not gonna sit here and say that, you know, Jay-Z and Oprah's and these modern day examples are the first examples of success and Black wealth, right? You have a brother from East Baltimore named Reginald Lewis, who was a corporate lawyer, who was the first American Black billionaire, right? But it wasn't
Mm.
anything fancy, right? He was a corporate lawyer, right? He started with a paper route, right? But he also came up at a time when it wasn't it wasn't okay to let people know you were successful, right? There's plenty of
Mm.
stories of Black wealth, and they were taught to just downplay it, not talk about it, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be over the top about it, right? But I think what's important, and when you talk about Black ownership, is we have a responsibility. All of us that are involved in pushing and shaping and influencing culture, we have a responsibility to make sure that the next generation that looks like us, they see us and they see what it looks like to be successful. We can't be ashamed of it.
Mm.
We can't put our heads down and act and be ashamed of success and wealth, right? Because then they have nothing to aspire to, and then they look someplace else, right?
Mm.
So it's like, you know, you need the LeBron James, and then you need the LeBron James, and you need the Maverick Carters and the Rich Pauls.
That's
You,
right.
you
The
want to
rich.
see that. You want to see like, oh, this is what Black ownership amongst friends looks like, right?
Hmm.
You want to see it in all shapes and forms, right? Whether it's Serena Williams, like whether it's important that our kids and their kids are going to be able to look to examples that are real and tangible and be like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to
Mhm.
want to be wealthy and be successful. And yes, and there's
Mhm.
responsibility with it, right? And that responsibility, I always say that artists and people who play in front of the camera, we do not expect perfection from them, right? Actually, I don't want perfection, right? Because you want to watch somebody make
That's right.
mistakes and then how they come back from that. But you do
That's
have a
right.
responsibility to be responsible with your words and your actions because again, those same people are watching you. All right. So,
Mhm.
you know, there's nothing wrong with you said something wrong, you did something. Of course, there's certain topics that are just, never okay. But we all make mistakes in our journey, in our path, right? Jay-Z has made mistakes. There's plenty of people who made mistakes.
Facts.
Doesn't but it's it's how you handle that responsibility. And the worst thing we can do is tell our entertainers and our athletes that they don't have a responsibility because they do, right? Because they represent for all of us, right? We expected Barack Obama to be a man of a certain to move a certain way, right? We
Mhm.
so if we can expect that of our president, why can't we expect that of our athletes? Why can't we expect that of our artists? Because they will influence the future CEOs. They will influence the future engineers
Mhm.
and doctors, right? Like it's not just artists influencing artists; it's artists influencing the world.
Yeah. But it's that notion of being perfectly
Mhm.
imperfect. And we have to embrace that not only within ourselves, but within those creative leads and gifted
Mhm.
talents that we know are at the forefront of all things. And that's to the most extreme. You've got the Kanye on the most
Mhm.
extreme side of that, right? And something like that, I look at the Truman Show.
Mhm.
It's like everything that he does or says or has happened is like exposed to everybody. So, but you have to give a level of grace for
Mhm.
mistakes growing to happen because guess what? We're all doing
Exactly.
it. Ours just doesn't happen to be on the broadest platforms
Exactly.
in the
That's right.
world. So I love how you tee that up of, having these creatives. Yeah, we're looking at them for greatness and we have high
Mhm.
expectations, but don't let those expectations turn into looking for perfection.
Exactly.
There isn't right. It's perfectly
Mhm.
imperfect. So, when you look at the impact that these black creatives have had on shaping culture and music culture in particular. It feels like there's a significant disparity, though, in seeing more black owned record
Mhm.
labels. And I'd love to get from you what do you think is needed to kind of shift to this greater equity and ownership balance in the music industry? And then what roles can consumers, you talked about still being a consumer, what role can consumers play in this evolution?
Yeah, listen, I think there are unfortunately there's always going to be somewhat of a disparity, right? Because
Hmm.
while we are the driving force in the economic consumer dollar, right? The our financial control inside the C-suite, inside these corporations, is not the same, right? And that's where independence comes in, right? The more we can't be mad at the system, right? Because
Okay.
they create a system that works for them, right? So it's our
Mhm.
responsibility to create a system that works for us. So it is our responsibility as executives, as consumers, as creatives, that we support one another so that when you create something and it's supported, it grows, and then you are able to employ other people that look like
That's right.
you, right?
Come on.
Right.
Come on.
If an independent artist, it's our job to go to his show and support his show. If we know someone who's starting a record label or doing art or whatever it is, like, listen, the only way that these things grow is through economic support, right? Like it's all cool to shout out or say hi or post your brother, your sister. You gotta support with the dollar, right? Because ultimately that's how things become scalable. They don't become scalable just because somebody liked you, right? Like
That's
things
right.
become scalable through success. If a Basquiat painting goes for $20 million, that's that's economic support, right? Imagine if he was
Mm.
alive to see the way that people are consuming his work, right? The same way that, you know, people wait in line for hours to buy a Beyonce ticket. Like, that's economic support. And that economic support
Mhm.
allows her to employ other people to be on the road and other artists to have opportunities, right? So it is important that we have the commitment and the patience to build our own and then stay the course of it, right? A lot of times we build our
Yep.
own and then we get frustrated and we quit, or we sell too soon, right? I'm not mad at anybody for getting a check or cashing out. Again, everyone's circumstances are different, but you know, if you want to secure seats for future generations of people that look like you, then you have to build it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't
Right.
happen any other way. You know, if you work for somebody else's company, it's their vision, it's their company, right? So if I go into X record label here, whatever insert name here, that's that person's vision. So whoever they decide to anoint as the next CEO or as the next VP or whatever direction they want to take that company, that's their vision, right? So I can choose to work there or not. But at my company, it's my vision. So I can choose to employ who I want to employ. I can choose to do business with the artists that I want to do business with, right? So, for me, it's about focus on supporting the culture that I believe in, right? And that doesn't that's no negative spin on any other culture. It's
No.
just like I'm here to support and give a pathway for people that look like me.
There's many of us, me included. Josh should have been having his own label. Josh should have been with all that he's done. And I feel like as you're now doing November Yellow, which I think this is like the perfect time to speak to the why and the vision. I mean, it's very clear to me, and I'm sure the others listening, it's very clear to them as well. Timing is everything, right? Like, given everything you've done, I would have thought maybe earlier, yeah, you could have done this 5, 10 years ago, but that wasn't God's plan.
Yeah.
That was not God's plan. And so I'm wondering the why and the now on November Yellow and your vision. What is it for this?
I had to go through what I went through to arrive at this place, right?
Mm.
Like, I've been blessed. I've worked for some amazing companies. I've been blessed to manage and co-manage some amazing talent. And I think now, as I look at the landscape, and for me, particularly when I talk about R&B, and to me it being, in my humble opinion, the most important genre of music there is, because to me it is a through line in everything, right? Like it is the soul, right? Like it is where, it started with us, right? It started, I mean, in church. You go back to jazz, you go back to the continent, you go back to Africa. Like the rhythm and blues that is R&B has been with us before anything, and its influence cannot be unseen, right? From pop culture to, I mean, you go as big as Adele or Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber, you know, it touches everything. And what
Mm-hmm.
what began to frustrate me was this notion that it's not as profitable as other genres, right? I start to hear that a lot in the past couple of years of, that doesn't make the kind of money that hip hop makes, or doesn't make the kind of money that pop makes, or that EDM can make, right? I was like, okay, hip hop became the youth culture's music, which speaks to all races, right? It has huge economic advantages because young white kids love it, right? So particularly young
Mm-hmm.
white males. So they drive that market, and because they have huge amounts of disposable income, they can support it in ways that other people can't. Fair.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about pop music. We talk about country music. We talk about Taylor Swift. Again, their economic dollar just reaches farther than ours, right? But at the bedrock of it, R&B can still be successful and profitable, and with if you do it the right way. And ultimately, all great R&B songs become pop hits, right? Usher is a pop star, right? He's ours. He started in black music. He is black music, but he's a pop star, right? The Weeknd is a pop star. He started in black music. Frank Ocean is a pop star. Like these guys, Beyonce is a pop star, right? So pop just means popular music. Pop is not like
Mm-hmm.
pop. Britney Spears and Taylor Swift don't own pop music. Pop means the most popular songs in the world, whether it's EDM, whether it's Afrobeat, whether it's country, whether it's hip hop. It's one of the most popular songs in the world. And every artist's dream and every artist's goal and every executive's goal is to make the most popular songs in the world that everyone listens to, all genres, all races, all colors, all doesn't matter, right? But the idea that R&B can't achieve that same success, or when it does, it's one in a million. We have to displace that notion. We have to change the narrative, right? And those artists need our support, right? There's tons of talented singers and songwriters out here making great R&B music that, while it may start more Black and while we may not spend the same, with the right support, it will become just as successful and popular as anything else, right?
That's
Like,
right.
when you talk about artists like Tina Turner, or if you talk about Stevie Wonder, you talk about Michael Jackson, like, where do people think these artists started? They started in our backyard.
That's
They
right.
started with rhythm and blues, right? They became global superstars through success, through making the most popular songs, right? And the reason why R&B to me is the most important is because everyone can relate to a great love song, to a great uplifting song. Like hip hop and rock,
Facts.
yeah, it's youth music. It's very specific. It's nuanced, right? Like your daughter may love a rock song, but it may not sit right with you. Or your daughter may love a little Uzi Vert song, but you might be like, yeah, I can't really get with that. But you and your daughter can agree on a Jasmine Sullivan record, right?
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Like it's I would say R&B is for the whole household, right? It doesn't leave anybody out. Everybody from the infant to the grandma, everybody can dance to everybody
Family.
everybody can listen
Family.
to those songs. So why wouldn't we support a genre that supports a whole household, right? It's like, so for me,
Mm.
that's all I want to just be about, pushing that narrative and pushing those artists to the forefront, right? Like that's all that matters to me, right? Is to be a part of creating artists and developing artists and songs that become those evergreen records that we just talk about forever, right? Like when people
Mm.
talk about, songs in the key of life, like it's timeless, right? And
Timeless.
you don't put an age on it, right? You don't put a
No.
color on it. You just say it's one of the greatest songs ever, and that's it.
So let me ask you this. Is there a golden era of music?
Everyone will speak to, again, when you talk about culture, everyone's going to speak to the period in life that music shaped them, right? So for me, probably for you, it's going to be the 90s, right? Because that was, you
Hmm.
know, that was our coming of age. That was 93. I'm a freshman in college. You're off on your own first. And I'm coming from New York I'm in my Mary Tribe Called Quest brand new being bag. And then I get to Atlanta and Biggie's coming into the scene and Faith and 112. So for us, that's
That's
the
the
era,
era.
right? Right.
That's
But
the era.
for someone else who's in that same path at 1918, 17, 18, 19, that's, in 2023, they're gonna speak to, what's moving them. Is it Summer Walker? Is it
Daniel
Daniel C,
Caesar.
right? Because like for them, those songs, those moments are going to be forever tied to that period in their life, right?
That's right.
That's the impact of music. So when you say the golden age, the golden age is as it relates to you and your development and what it means to you, what your transition from childhood to adulthood, right? Which is why
Hmm.
when you look up and you see the banker, he could be Black or white, or the finance dude in his 60s, and he's having his 6 year birthday party, he can afford to have whatever artist he wants. He's going to pick somebody from his youth that he remembers from when he was 20. He's like, yo, Jewel Hill was my favorite group. Boom, boom, boom. Because for him, that's a period in his life that was the greatest for him. Right. So we're
That's
all
right.
gonna be there. We're all gonna be there. Somebody's gonna say it was whoever. It was LL Cool J for this person. It's Kendrick Lamar for that person. Like, depending on
That's
your
right.
age and where your journey took you, it's always gonna be, your golden age is gonna relate to. I always say, like, 17 to 20 is like your magical 3 years when you become who you are, when your style becomes defined, when your taste in women, your taste in men, your taste in fashion, your taste in music, all those things come together in
Hmm.
that period, and it's kind of shapes who you are. And if you look back to that period, you'll be like, oh, okay, this is kind of it tracks, and this is what I was
Yeah, it
this
tracks, right?
this
Makes
makes sense,
sense.
right? So I think I think golden age is just always relevant to where you are in your life.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And so then the follow-up question then would be, if there is an individual that you think has had the largest impact on shaping music culture through the lens of R&B, because I definitely know about you. They call me Slow Jamsby. You are the epitome of Mr. Slow Jams and R&B. But if there was an individual, um, is there somebody that you could say?
An individual, I think New Edition as a group and Bobby Brown um, probably have had one of the greatest impacts for Black music just culturally, right? For they changed the narrative of what a boy band looks like, right? Like
Mm,
they were relatable. They looked like us. They dressed like us. They acted like us, right? They weren't corny. Then they made
mhm.
these fly songs that just like, you know, you want to play it for a girl, right? And then on the other side of the track, I think that Mary J. Blige has been that for generations of women. Her impact,
1,000.
it's like she's the definition of like hip hop and R&B soul, right? Like
Mhm.
she's become our Tina Turner, our Aretha Franklin, right? Like she's that one for us. And her music, the
Mhm.
pain in her music, the honesty in her music, the honesty in her tone, right? She's the definition of imperfect perfection, right? Like she never
Mhm.
claimed perfection. She just laid it out for you every time. Uh,
Literally. Literally.
So yeah, I think her. I think there is. I mean, I don't know that there's one person, right? There's things that there's Prince and his impact. Like Prince, his cultural impact allowed Black people who didn't fit into the normal box to feel seen, right?
Mhm.
Because here was
Mm.
this guy who was making these fly ass songs, who wore heels, who wore leggings.
Right. And so,
Right.
well, let's talk about that piece of his appearance at the time in which he was, and he's relevant now, but had this coming out. Like that wasn't embraced, bro.
Exactly.
But for some reason, for Prince, it was like,
He
okay,
he he was
cool.
unapologetic about it, and he did it in a way. He also did it at a time when he changed the definition of cool for Black people,
Facts.
right?
Love that.
So
Yeah.
you know, again, timeless, right? Here
Yeah.
forever. His impact can't. It's immeasurable. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think listen, for me, but then there's a lot of new guys and new guys and males and female artists that I think are doing that work, that are having that impact. I mean, when you look at artists like Black, who I love, and it's Moody, and it's Brent Faiyaz, they're really this new generation of R&B artists that are completely in touch with their emotions. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's a little, so it can be a little sad, but they're speaking to a generation of kids who are just feeling it, right?
That's right.
Like my son said to me the other day, he's like, look, I think the pandemic fucked everybody up, right? It's like
Mhm.
especially teenagers, right? Like, and if you think about it, when he said it, it made so much sense. When we were teenagers, going into high school, graduating high school, like that was some of the best times of our lives, right? And for so
Best.
many kids, it got stolen from them, right? And they got parked in their bedrooms. You know what I'm saying? So at a time when we was running around New York City and going to parties and going to this and doing that, and they weren't doing any of that, right? So the music that they're relating to kind of speaks to that time, right? For us, we were outside. Our music felt like that. You know what I'm saying? Like our
That's
music,
right.
our music dictated our actions. We were in the streets,
Mhm.
right? These kids are
Mm.
in their bedrooms. So their music just it feels like that, right? So again,
Feels like
music,
that.
I always say this too. If you want to know what was going on in history, if you want to know what people were thinking, what the youth were going through at a time, just listen to the music. Because the music will always
Listen to
tell
the
you
music.
what drugs they were on, what their emotions were about. Were they socially conscious? Was suicide a thing? Like the music will always tell you what the kids are trying to say.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I come back to the culture that I think you exemplify this commitment, evolution, excellence. And you've maintained what I call this consistent reputation of someone who gets things done, hard worker, reliable. Like anytime I mention your name to people, it's this immediate like, oh wow, no, Jaha's real deal. And for those who've worked with you, get things done, is who he is, what have you. But now in the industry, this industry is an interesting industry that those qualities and values and relationships and the way in which you move can be very difficult
It can be.
to maintain in this industry because not everyone operates on that same code. Let's just say
Mhm.
that. How challenging has that been? You know, because it really is easy to move like the majority, but I feel like you move like the minority, like character, consistent reputation.
And what's crazy, not to be funny, it hasn't been hard at all, right? And the reason why it hasn't been hard is, something you could relate to is like I gotta look my mother in the face. It's like
Mm, man,
my foundation starts there, right? Like that is the foundation of
mm,
my character, like my 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 hard work and my ability to want to get it done. That's all I knew. That's all I saw growing up, right? So I don't have any other examples. So when I see people that excel doing less, I'm like, that's their path, right? Yeah, we can all get frustrated. We could all want things to happen quicker for us, myself included. But I'm able to go to sleep at night and not have to look over my shoulder. I feel good about most of the choices I've made, and the ones that I feel good
that's right.
about. Like I've thought on them and figured out how not to do that again. But it, when you start with a solid foundation, it's actually much easier than people think, right? Because it also allows you to
Think.
see what you don't want to be like, right? Like,
That's right.
it's like you see
That's
the
right.
fast burn cases. I've seen some people that have flew past me, they've made more money or they've had quote unquote more success, but the crash is much harder. It's like, and for
Mm,
me, knock on wood, I've had a blessed career and, I've always had a roof over my head and I've always been able to provide for my family. And I feel like I live a great blessed life. And so I don't
that's
have
right.
any complaints. We could all want more. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. I don't want anybody to feel
That's
like
right.
it's a bad thing to want to be more successful or have more money. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But how you do it is what always has to be measured, right? You should always do it
That's right.
knowing like, is it worth what the outcome potentially could be?
Right.
That's how I measure. Again, we've all made mistakes, but for the most part, like I'm gonna go at it the way that I know is gonna kind of be a good representation for my family. Because at the end of the day, when I'm dead and gone, my kids they've got to carry this on. They've got to be able to speak on my name.
That's
I
right.
want my son and my
That's
daughter to be
right.
able to speak on my name in a way that makes them feel good. Not I don't want them to have to defend my name, in a negative way.
That's right. Yeah, that's funny. Of course, you watch Succession. You were. So I mean that, like, I just watched that, and I'm thinking, the dynamic on that show of these children and their father, and how they have to muster up to speak about this man. Now, granted, great influence, all the things. It goes back to what you were saying. What defines success? The money. Da, da, da. But man, do you see the way in which they conduct themselves? It's just like I couldn't imagine. It gives me an ulcer just watching some of these scenes,
Listen,
bro.
I was just saying like I- I'm over it, right? Because what made me really kind of sad about the show is again art imitates life, right?
One thousand percent. These things are coming from
That
somewhere.
show is based on a real life family, right?
Yep.
And when you watch the how they made the guy president, right? It made you say to yourself, these are the people that have the power that sit in rooms to affect change that can be very damaging and hurtful to millions of people
For
for
their
their
personal
personal
agendas.
agenda, and the agenda didn't even work out for them.
Did you-
They did all that, and it didn't even work out for them.
didn't even work
So
out
you
for
put
them.
a monster in office that you have no control over. You didn't get what you wanted, and now the country's going to go to shit. I'm sorry. I thought we just lived that. I thought we are living that. All right. So
Oh,
again, why it's so important that we build our own, that we control our own tables, because we can't control those tables. What we saw happen in Succession happens every day in the real world. That shit happens in rooms that we're not even in. We don't even know that those conversations are taking place.
yes.
That's why it's so important what you do with the conversations you do control, with the tables you do control, because
Mm,
you know that's the real world. That happens. It's happening.
real world. Yeah. So I come back to the foundation piece that you were talking about. I'm sorry, I had to jump on that Succession thing because I felt like it was so
Mhm.
appropriate. Um, but we come from a very, very spiritually grounded household and households, and it's very much a foundation for us. And I'd love for you to share where your faith best serves you in life and the questions and conversations you have on a regular basis with God, because I know how much mom prays over you, us on a daily basis. So I'd just like to hear from you, though, that impact.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it is. It's daily, right? It's it was just me and her growing up, right? Some and I think that's a reality our kids will never understand, right? Because regardless of whatever relationship situations we've gone through, all our kids know mom and dad, right?
Mhm.
And the faith that our mothers instilled in us and pray over us is like it gives us the wings, and it makes us it allows us to dream even in areas that they don't understand, right? When I called my mother and said,
That's right.
I want to drop out of college, I want to pursue this music thing, my very practical, grounded mother who's in education couldn't understand how music
At
was going to
all.
pay my bills, how I was going to support myself and my lifestyle off of music. Because also at that time, it was still somewhat early. It was still like the early '90s was still like it was still somewhat of a new thing. You only had, the you had the Berry Gordy's, and then you had the Russell Simmons, and then it was like, you know, all our friends would come out of school and low on Wall Street, right? So it
Hmm.
was it was still we were still marking some new and uncharted territory um at the time that I was doing it, right? So I think that I have to give it up to faith, right? Because I didn't graduate college. I don't have a bunch of degrees. I don't sing, dance. I don't rap. I don't produce music, right? Like I get shit done, right? Like I consider myself the intersection of creativity and commerce, right? Like how do we take what you want to see happen creatively and how do we make it make sense financially? And how do we turn it into a business, right? Like that's the art of being an A&R or being a manager. It's like talent comes to you and they've got dreams, and then they expect you to help them execute those dreams so those dreams become success, and those success becomes how they live, right? Because for artists, this is all they
Hmm.
do. I tell everybody all the time when an executive or a manager wants to get frustrated with the artist, I was like, remember, this is all they do. They don't do nothing else,
Right.
right? So your frustration, oh, this is unreasonable, or they're crazy, or they're getting on my nerves. Well, guess what? It's all they do. So you got to have a little bit of grace and consideration and patience for the creative mind, right? Because when it wins big, right? So
Mm.
the foundation of just like my mother and her belief in me, even for the unknown, set the tone. And for me, it also is why I believe that when you say who shapes culture, Black women shape culture. Because for me, Black
Mm.
women are the everything, right? They define the taste and tone of fashion, of of what people aspire to, right? Like other races have gone to doctors to make themselves look like Black women. You can't get more defining in culture than that, right? Um, Men do what they do to impress women, right? Like how you dress, the music that you make is to make a woman feel good, right? Like it is, they are it. If you look at in the makeup space, you look at what Rihanna's done with Fenty, right? If you you know, there isn't a category that Black women don't influence, shape, and help define what we consider culture.
Where do you find your peace in life, given, this very active, high intensity lifestyle?
My fitness journey and being able to have those moments when I zone out, whether I'm running, whether I'm cycling, like there's health benefits, of course. Of course, I want to look great. Yeah, but people, the emotional mood reset that it gives you and the clarity it gives you, even when you're not feeling good or even if you're upset about something, like it changes everything because, we can all have some unhealthy habits, right? But fitness will always be a healthy habit if if you go into it the mindset of like, okay, yeah, there's the vanity part of it, but just like, you just want to feel better.
Mhm.
Just want to, just need a second. Like I believe in self-care. I believe every human being needs to put on their face mask first, right? Like you can't be great to other people, to your family, to your kids, to your clients, if you can't put your face mask on first. Because if you're not breathing, how you get help somebody else breathe, right? Like, and
Absolutely.
that is key for me, right? Like, and it provides balance. It allows me to get up and find another day. Getting up at 5 a.m. and hitting the gym allows me to tackle the day in a way that some people can't because they're not feeling as good about themselves. They're not feeling as
That's
recharged
right.
or as recentered. And for me, I don't do it every single day. And we all have periods and we all have times when we can't or we're not feeling it. That's fine. That's human. But, we should all live our lives with having more good days than bad days. We should live our lives with having more days where we do the things that are healthy for us than things that aren't healthy for us. And
Yeah, and man, again, having the privilege of watching this journey closely of your purpose lived life, like you're being very humble with this workout thing. Yeah, the 5 a.m.s you've been doing recently for the last couple of years, check. But like you trained for a marathon, multiple. You've done triathlons, and I've looked at you like, dog, what Black male thinks about doing? I'm sorry, a like who does this? But I see that it was the mental fueling that these things provided for you to be the committed individual that you are and contribute the way that you've contributed. Which I'm really glad that you mentioned the workout piece and not to be like the buff, core dude, because you're definitely not that. You're the most working out, non in shape dude I've ever met in my life. And this is a joke amongst the crew. But like that discipline that you have, bro, is second to none. And you're right. It literally sets you up. And I don't want to call it for battle every day, but it prepares you to continue to do what you do. And I've seen that. I've seen that. So now we're telling the Jaha Johnson story. It's the movie, it's the documentary. The life documentary Jaha Johnson is about to begin. What's the song that's playing and why?
oh, Donny Hathaway, a song for you.
Why?
Again, because it starts with Black women. In high school, a girl, I was at her place. She's going through her mom's record collection. And we was talking about music and playing songs. And she played me Donny Hathaway's song for you. I might not have been in high, I might have been in 8th grade or 9th grade, right? I had never heard the song before. I didn't even know who Donny Hathaway was.
Wow.
And could have been because I liked her. But the song just sounded like one of the greatest songs I'd ever heard. And the feeling I got when I heard that song is the feeling I've been chasing every day I get up and do this, right? Because like I want the songs I'm a part of to make people feel the way that song made me feel. It made me feel like it just made me feel great. It's a great song, right? It wasn't the greatest song in the world. I've heard songs that I've heard lots of amazing records, right? But it was the moment. It's the moment that I could always go back to, right? And I feel like music is
Mm-hmm.
about creating moments for people to hold on to, right? Like it music music becomes like the internal disk that you get to save the memory on, right? So like if you think about any great memory you have in your life, happy or sad, I promise you could relate a song to that moment, because that's the impact of music.
Yeah.
And that that feeling is the feeling that I look for every single time. When somebody tells me they heard a song I was involved with and it made them feel that, that's the goosebumps I'm looking for. That's why I love live shows. I always say that live shows is the most honest part of the music business, because it's the only part of our business that is pure through and through, right? Like it's not the radio or Spotify or Pandora. That's suggested listening. That's background. You maybe turned it on, you maybe didn't. You maybe looked for that song, you maybe didn't. But the commitment to go to a show, I don't care if I gave you free tickets to your favorite artist. You still got to get in your car, still got to pay gas money, still got to get dressed, still got to pay for food. You know, whether it's a date, you still got to pick her up. Like the commitment to go to a live show means that you have an expectation of that artist when you get there. And your expectation is for them to give you a great show, to make you feel something, right? So like that connection between the fan and the artist, it's the most valuable thing in our business. It's the only thing that you can't fake. You can't fake the streams, you can't fake the listens, right? And you can't fake the feeling, because what happens is, for all of us, we've all been to a show that we loved and came back and told somebody about it. Yo, you got to see such and such. Yo, that show was great. And somebody tells somebody else, and somebody else tells somebody else, and somebody goes and sees that show, right? Like that word of mouth, that impact that a great show has on the audience is immeasurable, right? So for me, it's about that feeling. Like I'm always like, that's my drug. My drug is that feeling. My drug is like, how can I feel that feeling?
So look, we can keep going on for days, as you know. We always like ending the session with sharing 3 seeds that you would want to leave with the stewards of culture moving forward. And you've dropped a great deal of them, but if there were 3 that would come to your mind, the 3 critical things for you, what would they be?
For me, the 3 critical things would be intentional, stay the course, and do what you love, right? Because whether you want to be in music, whether you want to be a doctor, whatever it is that you want to do, right? Like you have to do it with intention, right? Because we don't control the timeline, right? Everybody wants it to happen quicker than things happen. That's everyone. That's just human nature, right? But when you're intentional, it will happen, right? And when you stay the course, it will happen, right? Like the enemy is betting on you to quit. They're betting on it. They're like, the devil wants you to quit, because they know that if you keep going, that you will get it, right? So staying the course, like when you talk about my workouts, that's what it's about, that level of commitment to stay the course. Not, when you run a marathon, it's not about finishing first, it's about finishing, right? You're only competing with yourself, right? So staying the course is always key. And do what you love, right? That's where I always end with, like, if you don't love it, then it's just a job. If you love it, it's your life, it's your career, it's who you are, right? Like, I don't care what it is.
Air you breathe.
When you do what you love, on those bad days, the bad days don't seem as bad when you're doing what you love, right? Because when you're doing what you don't love, the bad days is when you quit. That's the person working, no offense, that's the person flipping burgers. They get a bad day and they walk out and quit because they don't want to be flipping no goddamn burgers. Right? They're like, fuck this shit, I'm out of here. But when you're doing what you love, you be like, man, listen, I could do 1,000 burgers. You can't take me off my course because I love this. You know what I'm saying? So that's
man, it. that reminder was so powerful. And I can't thank you enough, not only for the reminder, but being an example of all of this. Because as somebody who knows you, I know you walk in this and I know you live this. So I want to thank you for being an example. I want to thank you for sharing the reminder, because it even hit me. Like, stay the course, continue to push forward. And I'm so grateful for you, and I love you dearly.
I appreciate it. Love you. Thank you, man.
We truly appreciate your support because it helps us fulfill our mission of promoting cultural awareness and personal development. Please click the subscribe button below to help ensure and solidify our mission.